The scent of burnt cedar and righteous fury clung to the night air. I stood there, rooted to the spot, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs, watching the flames dance with a terrible, hungry joy. She did it. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only stare at the twisted grin on her face as she tossed the empty gas can aside with a callous clatter. What kind of monster? What kind of pure, unadulterated evil would do this? My hands balled into fists, trembling with a rage so cold it burned. The crackle of the fire, the sickening pop of glass giving way. It was a soundtrack to my world ending. She looked at me then, her eyes glinting in the firelight, an audacious challenge in their depths. Consider this your final warning, Pastor. She spat, her voice a low, venomous hiss that somehow cut through the roar of the inferno. This is what happens when you don't follow the rules. I felt the heat on my face, but it was nothing compared to the fiery indignation in my soul. I wasn't just a pastor. I was the son of a firefighter who had taught me the language of flames, the way they spoke of both destruction and rebirth. And she had just spoken to me in a tongue I knew intimately, a language of violence and irreversible consequence. What she didn't know was that a fire in the heart is a far more dangerous thing than one made of gasoline and matches. Oh, Karen, you just started a war you have no idea how to win. The following morning was a blur of police tape, hushed whispers, and the acrid smell of smoke. Karen, of course, was already playing the innocent victim, the outraged citizen. That church was a fire hazard. She'd shriek to anyone who would listen, her voice shrill and full of theatrical indignation. I've been telling them for months. My community, my flock, was devastated. A 70-year-old sanctuary, gone in a night. I watched Mrs. Gable, a widow who had been coming to this church since she was a girl, pick up a piece of charred wood, her hands shaking. A low sob escaped her lips. That was it. That was the moment. The passive, turn the other cheek, part of me shriveled up and died in the ashes. A new resolve, hard and unforgiving, took its place. I would find her. I would expose her. Not for revenge. No, but for justice. For Mrs. Gable. For the families who'd celebrated weddings and mourned loved ones here. For the sacred space Karen had so casually desecrated. But I wasn't a detective. So I did what a pastor does best. I listened. I started with the HOA board. The same board Karen had. For years. Dominated with her petty tyrannies and self-serving regulations. It was a slow, grueling process. The board members were terrified of her, cowering under her oppressive thumb. But I noticed something. A young man, Liam, who Karen had recently appointed as her vice chair, seemed different. He avoided eye contact. His body language screamed of guilt and distress. He was a new homeowner, just moved in with his young family. I approached him after a meeting. He flinched, expecting a tirade, but I just offered him a coffee. Karen's been a real piece of work, I said, a soft, weary exhale. I'm so sorry you have to deal with her. His shoulders sagged. A long, pained silence stretched between us. He took a sip of his coffee, the tremor in his hand causing the liquid to slosh precariously. You don't understand, Pastor, he whispered, his voice barely audible. She has something on me. Something about my home loan application. If I don't do what she says, my family loses everything. He was trapped, a pawn in her twisted game. My heart ached for him, but a new light flickered. This was my twist. Karen didn't just act alone. She built an empire of fear. I leaned in. What if I told you? You don't have to be afraid anymore. We started working in secret, late at night, poring over old HOA meeting minutes, financial records, emails. Liam was my mole, a reluctant hero. He would bring me documents, photos, audio recordings from his phone. The pattern was staggering. Karen wasn't just a nuisance. She was a predator. She'd find minor infractions, leverage them, and then demand favors, money, or loyalty. She had built her suburban fiefdom on the quiet terror of her neighbors. The church, it turned out, was the last holdout. We were the only property in the community that she didn't control. Our tax-exempt status and historic deed making us untouchable by her usual rules. The fire wasn't about a fire hazard. It was about power. It was about a woman who couldn't stand the sight of something she couldn't own or dictate. My hands trembled again. Not from rage this time, but from the weight of the truth. We had it all. The incriminating emails. The video from a motion-activated camera I discreetly installed on a neighbor's property weeks prior showing her. Unmistakable in the firelight. Holding the torch. The truth was a heavy, cold rock in my stomach. The time for grieving was over. Now, it was time for reckoning. The next HOA meeting was set for a Friday night. A day she typically used to parade her power. She waltzed in. A queen on her throne. A smug smile on her face. Now, as you all know, she began. Her voice dripping with faux sympathy. The tragedy with the church has been a real wake-up call. We need to be stricter with our regulations. I propose a new fund to help rebuild our community spaces, which will be entirely managed by me. Of course. A murmur went through the crowd. This was it. The moment of truth. I stood up. My voice calm but firm. Karen, I said, her name feeling like a curse on my tongue. I believe the community has a right to know where that tragedy came from. Her smile evaporated. Pastor, I hardly think this is the time or place, she started. But I cut her off. This is exactly the time and place, I stated, my gaze sweeping the room, meeting the terrified, confused eyes of my neighbors. Because the person responsible for that fire is in this room. And it's you. The collective gasp was a physical thing. Her face went from smug to purple with fury. How dare you? She screeched, her voice cracking. That is slander. That is a lie. I will sue you for everything you own. She stood, her chair scraping loudly across the floor, pointing a trembling finger at me. He's making this up. He's a bitter man whose church burned down. The room was a whirlwind of noise, accusations, and fear. It was then that Liam, the quiet, terrified young man, stood up. His voice, though shaky, was clear and loud. No, he said, holding up a flash drive. He's not lying. And I have the proof. The air went out of Karen's lungs like a popped balloon. I looked at her, truly looked at her for the first time. The mask of arrogance fell away, revealing a small, pathetic woman consumed by her own insecurity. A hollow, bitter husk. She tried to bolt, to run, to escape the crushing weight of her lies. But the room closed in on her. A wall of accusing faces. The police, whom I had called in advance, were waiting outside. Her final, defeated sob was a quiet, pathetic thing. A whisper lost in the rising chorus of voices. The downfall wasn't a sudden, cathartic explosion, but a slow, agonizing implosion. The community watched, stunned, as the police led her away in handcuffs. Her face a mask of shattered disbelief. The illusion of her power, so carefully constructed over years of intimidation and manipulation, was gone. The HOA fund she'd proposed was instead turned into a collective fund to rebuild the church. With donations pouring in from every corner of the neighborhood, the new church, rising from the ashes, became more than just a place of worship. It became a symbol of what happens when good people, however terrified, finally find the courage to stand together. It was a beautiful thing. And Karen, well, the truth, once it gets out, has a way of following you. She was found guilty. Her reputation in tatters. Her tyranny over the neighborhood a cautionary tale. She was a woman who thought she could control everything. But in the end, her own actions were the one thing she couldn't control. As for me, I learned that faith isn't just about turning the other cheek. Sometimes, it's about standing up for what's right, even if it means fighting fire with fire and winning. The sound of hammers and saws now replaced the roar of the fire. The scent of fresh lumber and newly planted flowers filled the air. It was a new beginning. But it begs a bigger question, doesn't it? In this story, who was right and who was wrong? Where does justice end and revenge begin? It's a messy world we live in. What do you think?